In this video we're going to create the fence, the overgrowth and the hedges. Having done this tutorial, you should be able to distribute items along splines using create mode, use inverted fall-off maps, use the new forest object areas, use pen painting techniques and use parameterization by area. Let's get started. Starting from where we left off in the previous tutorial, we'll just hide the existing forest objects. So far we've done the flowers, the stones, the track grass, the sunflowers and the trees. To start with, we'll do the fence. Create a new forest object and click on the rickety fences spline to start with. Let's add some new geometry. In the scene there are 3 fence planks. So let's go to geometry, go to add multiple custom objects and find our planks. They should be named planks 1, 2 and 3. Plank 1, plank 2 and plank 3. Hit add and delete the default object. Now though we've picked that spline as a distribution area, we're not actually going to use it. This whole thing's done in a tree editor in custom edit mode. So let's come down to custom edit mode and we're going to use the creation tools. And what this enables you to do is to scatter along a path. So let's pick the path, and it's the same ones we used before, which is the rickety fence. Set the spacing to 200 millimeters. Make sure follow path is on, which means that the rotation will attempt to adhere to the bend of the path, and then hit create. What you should get is a whole series of planks running along your path. To see this a little bit better, because the poly count may not be too horrendous, let's click on display and click on mesh so we can see what's happening. Now it's okay, but it's all a bit uniform, so let's go into the transform rollout. Let's turn on translate, rotate and scale, and enter the following settings. In translation, let's set the X to 0. We don't really want it moving backwards and forwards and going through this kind of supporting spline we've got in the background. We'll change the Y so it's a little less, set it at 15. For rotation, we don't actually want any rotation on the Z axis at all. So let's set that back to 0. However, we could have some minor rotation on the X and the Y. So the X axis is going to, we don't want it tilting backwards away from us at the moment. Just coming forwards is okay. So let's put the maximum to 2%. And you can see it starts to just become a little bit more irregular. For the Y axis, we can probably afford to go both ways. So -2 and 2. Let's go into the scale settings and make them a little less dramatic. Let's go 96 to 104. Turn off the aspect ratio locks. 96 to 104. And finally for Z, let's set it to 98 by 105. That seems to work. That's great, but it would be nice if the odd plank were missing. So let's go back up to geometry and pick any one of these geometry items. What we'll do is we'll hit disabled, which takes one of the planks out of the equation. Or rather, what actually happens is that the plank's still in the equation, its position is still being calculated, rather it's not displaying, so we end up with spaces. Now there's a few too many, so perhaps what we'll do is take the probability of the disabled plank down a little bit. Its probability at the moment is at 100%, so let's set this to something a lot smaller, like 20. Now this doesn't reflect automatically in the distribution, so in order to see that effect we have to go back into the tree editor and click again on create. Now we see the odd plank is missing, and incidentally clicking create multiple times gives you different versions using the same parameters, so you can click until you find one you like. That looks good to me. Just to make this a little bit more manageable in the viewport, when I turn the other forest back on, I'm going to set the viewport display back to point cloud. And that's this section done. Next we'll create some overgrowth that grows automatically around the forest fence we just created, the rail clone fence on the right here, and the barn. And anything else you fancy overgrowth growing around the perimeter of. To get started, we'll create a new forest object, and we'll click on the spline overgrowth as the first area. Let's go in and start to change the geometry. So click on geometry, and then let's click on add multiple custom objects. Next, find tool grasses. And this is a forest object itself, so we're nesting forest objects here, and there's a tutorial on the site which is good for explaining this principle. We also want canes and ground cover. Hit add and delete the default object. Let's go to the distribution map and set it to dense, and set the units to about 2,350 millimeters. Let's come down to diversity, go to clusters, and set it to about 380. Now let's set the transform settings. Translation is on, and set it its defaults. Rotation is -10, 10, -10, 10. And you can leave the Z as it is. And then scale, we'll set it between 80 and 150. So now we have overgrowth everywhere. So let's start by getting it just growing around the perimeter of this barn. Go back to areas, click on add object area, and select the barn. It is indeed large, so let's select yes. So let's set the fall off density exclude to about 2,000 millimeters. And you can see that this has created a gap around the barn. We can set the same for the scale. Maybe we'll take it up even more actually, 3,000. So at the moment it's creating a space, it's creating an exclude area. What we actually want it to do is just grow in this area. So it's very simple. We go to large barn, and come down here and make sure you click on invert curve. And when you do that, you see now it grows only in those areas around the barn. It's not quite as dense as I'd like, so let's turn the density up a little. Maybe by turning the threshold down. Let's turn the maximum density up so we can see them. Let's give that a go. Right, so that's the barn done. Now it's quite a big distribution area, it's quite a big exclude area, which is okay around the barn, but it's probably going to be too much around the fences, so I might have to tone it down. Okay, so let's go back to areas, and let's add another object area. So rail clones objects can be added as object areas. Okay, so that's created, and obviously it's creating a bit of a mess, but that's because we haven't yet set the invert curve for this area. So if we click on this, we now have some growth around the bottom of the fence, but it's leaving some gaps, and the reason for that is the resolution of the map that it's using to determine these areas. So all we need to do is just to up that, and we'll get better accuracy, and we won't have those patches. Let's try 1024. That's not bad, but we could even try higher than that. 2048 gives us a slightly better result. What we're also seeing here now is that this is it's coming out far too far. So what we could do is turn the exclude down globally, or we could, for this particular area, just change the fall off effect so that it starts to come in a little bit. Either one is fine. Next up, we want to add the fence on the left hand side. So this is a forest object, as you remember. So we need to go back to areas, add forest object as excluding area, and then click on this forest. Okay, so same again, we need to invert the curve, but it's not quite close enough to the fence. So let's dial the scale in a little bit until it gets closer. And then, like before, it's coming out too far, so we will have to take down the effect a little bit just to bring it in. But the beauty of having this effect with the higher rating is that where I do want it to be fairly wide, like around the barn, I can do so. But around things like the fence, where I want the area to be somewhat smaller, I can just turn down the fall off effect, since you can't control the fall off on a per area basis from here. So that's that done. What I might do as well is just open up the forest trees object we created initially, since there is a forest here, and it might be nice to have some undergrowth growing around that, or overgrowth, I guess. So let's add that to the exclude list 2, another forest. So click on that, and you can see again it's somewhat huge, and it needs inverting. So let's invert it, and then we can control the scale from here too, if you like, either taking it in or out. And you can change the effect. And that's the overgrowth done. Finally, in this video, we're going to create these hedges. There are 3 hedge objects in the scene: a small, medium and large hedge. And we're going to create a system whereby you can paint either a randomized collection of all 3, or areas where you have only small, only medium or only large, to give us maximum flexibility. And the reason doing this is so that you can paint along this fence line with the sort of shuffled version here, and then we can have some smaller hedges here to allow us access to see onto the lawn and onto the into the barn area. And then there was also anywhere else you want to scatter them. So it's a good system to set up. So let's make a start. Come over into your file from the previous point with the forest objects that we've already created. I'm going to go to manage layers, and just again for a bit of ease, I'm going to turn off the forest that we have in the scene. That way we can see better what we're doing. Right, so we're going to create a new forest object. And I'm going to select the ground plane as the distribution surface. It's a large area, so yes. Come into here, go to your geometry settings, and we're going to add all the hedges as geometry objects. So again, click on add multiple objects, and you should find you've got they're in here somewhere. Call them bushes: bush large, bush medium and bush small, and hit add, and then delete the default object. Come into areas and disable the surface area, since we don't actually want it to scatter on that surface. Let's come down to transform and just enable translation, rotation and scale, and accept the default settings. Back up to distribution map. Let's change the density to 22,000. Now let's set up all the different paint areas. So come to areas, add a new paint area, and let's call it all bushes. And that one will randomly select from the 3 bushes we have in the object. So create another one. And let's call this one small bushes. Add another and call it medium. Oops. And finally large bushes. So at the moment these are all identical in that they all distribute all 3 of the hedge objects. What we want to do is have small bushes can scatter the small ones, medium the medium, and large the large. So that's easy to do. If we come down here under plants, it says select models. Now I've currently got small bushes selected, so I click to turn on select models and then click on pick, which brings up the objects I've got in this forest. So what I want to do is just turn on bush small only and hit OK, and then do the same thing for the others. So medium, select target models, pick medium, hit OK, and then large, select models and pick large. Okay, so what I have now is the ability to paint large bushes only, medium bushes only, small bushes only, or a selection of all of those. Let's just undo that. Now there are a few things we might want to change. If, for example, I paint a patch of small bushes, you can see that there's some fairly big gaps between them. However, if I paint the larger ones, the spacing's much more appropriate. So what we want to do is to change the density for the small bushes without it affecting the larger ones. And what's great about this paint areas tool is that as well as being able to select the plants, I can also change the density of the distribution map. So with small bushes on, if I come down to override distribution map, I can easily change the scale to change the density. So if I pull this scale down to say 75, or maybe even 70, getting something that's much more appropriate. And the beauty of this system is that this can be done at any point, even after you've painted. So you can pretty much paint your areas and worry about the scaling and the plants later. Let's delete that for now. And then we'll start painting some hedges. The obvious place for the hedges is on the other side of this fence, but feel free to experiment and put them anywhere you please. I'm going to start with the all bushes, go to a paint layer, and I'm pretty sure I want most of these to be down the side of this fence. So let's just sort of paint some of these. Let's have a look at it from the camera view. Wrong camera. Okay. I'm being careful to avoid coming up too far because I want this view into the lawn about here. So that's probably about as far as I'm going to go with that. And I could even delete a little bit in the middle maybe, so we can see a little bit of the field in the background there. And then let's paint some around the building itself. So let's just come around the building. Okay, now I don't want to leave this blank, this area here, because it's, you know, it's going to look kind of odd. So it would be nice to have some bushes here. More than anything, they cast a shadow on the fence, and they are slightly visible along the top. So we're going to small bushes mode, and from here onwards, let's just fill in with some smaller bushes. Let's go back to camera view, see how that looks. So they're kind of visible. We could add the odd medium one, maybe about here. And maybe a large one just to change the framing a bit. Yes, we've got a large one. We've got a view through here. Might take that medium one out. So this can be done anywhere in the scene. I might, for example, put a bush just here somewhere. Erase. Too much. Try a smaller one. Small bush, paint. Just clipping the top. And I think we're going to want some around the bottom here, where this fence is going to meet this much newer rail clone fence. So let's just put some down there, maybe all bushes. See, there's a sort of gap here, let's fill that in. Maybe around this perimeter too. Anywhere else you fancy, really? Okay. So setting the areas up in this way not only allows you a lot of flexibility, but it also allows you to change things after the fact. So at any point I can go in here and change the scale, and you can see that it's affecting everywhere I've painted that particular brush. Or I could decide, you know what, I don't want the large bushes at all, so I could go to plant, select models, pick, and just pick the medium and the small. And it gives me a lot of control. But that finishes this video. In the next video we will add the lawn and some ivy, and then we'll look at the materials.